Okay, so you cover the Niners, you cover the Eagles. Um, you obviously are very well familiar with the NFC Championship game last year and how
Mhm.
things ended. 49 the 49er players then, the Eagles went on to the Super Bowl, the Niners went into their off season. Several Niners showed up at the Super Bowl and of course were asked about the NFC Championship game loss. And more than a couple, George Kittle and others said that they believe the 49ers would have won if Brock Purdy had not gotten hurt. That obviously made huge headlines in Philadelphia. And the Eagles basically said, "Hey, you disrespected us. You can say that you could have won, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't go on there and say you would have won or should have won if Purdy doesn't go down." So there's a lot of bad blood. The Niners have circled this game. They badly want it. I'm sure the Eagles fans would love nothing more than the deal the 49ers a serious blow. Whether it's for home field or not, Eagles could lose the game and still get the number one seed and have the first round bye in home field throughout the playoffs. So that's not necessarily on the line, depending on what Philly does against Buffalo this weekend. But is the game more important for the Niners or the Eagles? And who's more motivated here? Is it the Niners because they talked a big game and now they got to back it up, or is it the Eagles to try to throw a little pain at the Niners because maybe they feel like the Niners didn't respect the fact that they beat them in the NFC Championship game?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating matchup, and I think the TV ratings for this game are going to be insane. And I want to start with this. I thought last year we were robbed of a potentially all-time great NFC Championship game. When you canvassed the Niners roster and you compared it with the Eagles roster, Philadelphia and San Francisco were both obviously great teams. The Eagles were the number one seed, 14-3. San Francisco ended the regular season on that crazy winning streak. They were 13-4. But multiple teams had and still do have multiple Pro Bowlers, multiple All Pros, and future Hall of Famers. And what's funny about this matchup is that previously to that NFC Championship game, San Francisco and Philadelphia had no history at all as rivals. They met one time in the playoffs. It was in the mid 1990s when San Francisco won this really low scoring, grimy game. But then how the NFC Championship game transpired and San Francisco's reaction to it, giving kind of fuel to Philadelphia and their fan bases, they always like to be the underdogs, has made this somewhat of a really intense rivalry game without these two organizations having much of a history. I think for San Francisco, this is the bigger game. I think that they really want to exercise their demons, and they're tired of everybody in Philadelphia calling them whiners, right? Instead of the Niners. Because look, I think that if San Francisco had Brock Purdy healthy in that football game, it would have been a little bit closer. Now, the Eagles were still able to dominate that game outside of the Brock Purdy injury. I thought they kicked the Niners' asses in the trenches, and that was with the Eagles' offensive line and their defensive line. Anytime Josh Johnson is playing quarterback in the NFC title game and Christian McCaffrey is having to drop back. But I think for San Francisco to kind of exercise those demons and to prove to the football world, hey, if we're at full strength, this is how we match up with the team that everybody is saying is the best team in football in Philadelphia right now. And I do think the Eagles are the best team in football. To go on the road, come back by 10, hostile environment, to beat Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid at their crib after you lost to them in the Super Bowl, I think is a massive win. And I know this Chiefs offense isn't the same that it's been in previous years, but to pitch a second half shutout, I think is a really big deal. To generate a pass rush from Patrick Mahomes to consistently move him off his spot, I think is a huge deal. Philadelphia has this clutch factor and this clutch gene where they always seem to make the right play. And because Jalen Hurts is so cool, calm, and collected, the rest of the team kind of takes on that mantra and that attitude where they never feel as though they are out of a game. I think that this is going to be a terrific matchup. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I hope that finally we get to see these two teams at full strength, because I think this has the makings of being a Super Bowl matchup if it wasn't for these teams being in the NFC. But I think it's a bigger game for San Francisco because they haven't beaten the Eagles yet. The Niners have. or the Eagles have beaten the Niners, and the Eagles made it to the Super Bowl last year. And to get that confidence and to send that message that, hey, we are for real, I think it's important for San Francisco. And they've been talking about it. They've had this matchup circled since losing, and they have that sour taste in their mouths. Lastly, I was at the Super Bowl last year. I was in Glendale, Arizona on Super Bowl Radio Row. I interviewed Christian McCaffrey. I asked him about it. You could tell that he was a little bit frustrated and upset that they didn't have their team at full strength. I was there when George Kittle and Deebo Samuel were talking on Super Bowl Radio Row and making the comments that they were. I watched Deebo on the Kay Adams show, and I was like, man, they really feel as though they didn't get an equal opportunity, and I can totally see why they feel that way.
Well, and it played to the Eagle fan like disrespect, but I think what it really was the Niners' undying belief in this rookie quarterback, now the second-year quarterback. They think that Brock is special, and I don't know that the NFL fan, rank and file fan, especially when they said it, saw that specialness. Now this year, as Purdy's kind of elevated his game and played at almost an MVP type level, I think maybe that speaks a little bit more to what the Niners players were speaking to, more than, hey, they disrespected us. No, I don't think they disrespected you. They just really believed in their guy. M. Patel in the chat says, Eagles play big in big moments. 49ers do not. 49ers need to get out to a lead in this game. Eagles pasty is awful. Is the Eagles pasty awful, Chase?
So it had been statistically going up against the Chiefs, but then they really shored things up on that back end. A big reason for their struggles, they hadn't had the same secondary combination in back-to-back games all year because they have suffered a litany of injuries. And it looked as though they were going to shore up slot nickel corner by signing Bradley Roby once Avonte Maddox, who's a very good slot nickel corner, went out probably for the rest of the year with the pec injury. He plays 2 games and then he's out. Darius Slay was out. James Bradbury's been banged up. They traded for Kevin Byard. Reed Blankenship has missed some time as their other safety. So finally against Kansas City, they actually had their starting secondary intact for the first time all year. Darius Slay on one outside, James Bradbury on the other, Bradley Roby in the slot, Reed Blankenship and Kevin Byard as their 2 safeties. I think they're better than what the numbers show, but context is always important, and that context is important in this conversation. I don't think that they're quote-unquote awful. I think that secondary at full strength, with how good, premier, and deep that Eagles defensive line is, I think this Eagles defense is going to start to hit its stride, and I think they could pose some challenges for San Francisco because their strength is their defensive line. The Niners' weakness, in my opinion, even though they've been playing a little bit better, is their offensive line. And that's how you can really take over the game and win a game on the margins that is so closely contested between these 2 elite teams.
I think one thing that I've got to see more of, I got to see the Niners start to target Brandon Ayuk more. He only had 4 targets in this game. He only had 3 against Jacksonville. I mean, this guy's got to be a half dozen target a game guy minimum. I'd like to see him get like 10 targets a game. I think he's having that kind of a year. How do you think who do you think he matches up with the Eagles? Will the Eagles put Bradbury on him? How do you see the Eagles trying to match up with Ayuk?
Yeah, we know that Kyle Shanahan likes to mix and match with Brandon Ayuk in the slot, Brandon Ayuk on the outside, Deebo in the slot, Deebo Samuel on the outside. He'll line him up on the right side. He'll line him up on the left side. And I'm not sure if Philadelphia is going to have one particular player trail Ayuk and Deebo throughout the day. I'll also say that the Eagles linebacking core isn't the greatest. Nakobe Dean on IR for the second time this year. They have Zach Cunningham and Nicholas Morrow who have played solid ball, but I think George Kittle could play a huge role in this game, and that's a factor here. I think that San Francisco does have the edge if they can pass protect with being able to utilize their weapons in Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle against this Eagles passing defense, because whether Ayuk is against Darius Slay or James Bradbury, that means that Deebo is taking one of the other ones. And I think that San Francisco has this slight edge there. So pass protecting is going to be critical. If I'm Kyle Shanahan, I'm starting John Feliciano again at right guard. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Fletcher Cox, they are menaces on the interior of that Eagles defensive line. They can ruin the game and alter the game plan for San Francisco if they can't pass protect. They're also the number one rushing defense in the National Football League as well. So San Francisco, if they can find success on the run, like they did against Seattle, to open up the pass game, I think that that's a critical kind of storyline in this game too. But slight edge for San Francisco, and I'm with you, Larry. You utilize Brandon Ayuk any way that you can, because I'm not sure that the Eagles have the secondary personnel to stick with both him and Debo, and then you throw George Kittle into the mix as well. Maybe you line up Christian McCaffrey a little bit more out of the slot as well.
If you look at the pressures that the Niners O-line gave up in this game to Seattle, the left side, Trent Williams and Aaron Banks, only one pressure account towards Williams, 2 for Banks. So 3 total pressures. Brendel only gave up 1 in the middle. But the combo of Feliciano and McKivitz on the right side gave up seven pressures. And they'll go up against most likely Fletcher Cox and Hassan Reddick.
Yep.
How do you see that matchup? I mean, to me, this is a major part of the game next Sunday is, can the 49er, right side of their offensive line stand up to Cox and Reddick?
Yeah, luckily Tyler Kroft isn't here any longer to have to guard and defend and block Hassan Reddick on that outside. But look, I've been saying this all year on the show. I'm sure you have been as well, Larry. And I know that you always look at trench play because that can really dictate the outcome of a football game. Colton McKivitz scares the hell out of me as this season progresses. And as you get into the playoffs and you're going up against a team like the Dallas Cowboys with their personnel along the defensive line with Micah Parsons, a team like the Detroit Lions with Aiden Hutchinson, a team like the Philadelphia Eagles with Hassan Reddick. But a lot of people are sleeping on what Josh Sweat has been able to do. Statistically, he's been one of the best defensive ends in football. And then on the interior, Jalen Carter against Creed Humphrey was excellent. And the interior of that Chiefs offensive line is one of the best in the NFL. Jalen Carter was so dominant. Jordan Davis is 6'6", 340 pounds. Fletcher Cox is defying father time. I guarantee you that the Eagles are going to try to put Jordan Davis, Fletcher Cox, even Milton Williams, a backup, Fletcher Cox, all those personnel to that right side of the Niners offensive line to try to take advantage of the size matchup against Feliciano, McKivitz with him going up against Hassan Reddick. Jake Brendel is at a disadvantage because he's a little bit of a smaller center. That is one way that if the Niners can shore up in pass protection and they can run block and they can win that matchup at the point of attack, I think that they can win this game. If Philadelphia is able to get the advantage there and they can dominate with that personnel, with that matchup, I think that San Francisco is just going to struggle to really maintain and gather any consistency with running it and throwing it. To me, I think that's where this game is decided next week. It's along the trenches, and it's the Niners offensive line against the Eagles defensive line.
How about Derek Barnett? You mentioned Barnett. Could he help the 49ers? Would you? What's his? I mean, I know he's a little bit long in the tooth, but he's not really old by NFL standards. He's probably got 2-3 more years of life in him. Is he just a guy got caught up in a numbers game on one of the NFL's deepest units, or has he regressed significantly and he's not worth having?
Yeah, he's 28 years old. He's coming off a torn ACL last year. He is a player that has never generated a lot of sack numbers, but he has generated a lot of quarterback pressures and quarterback hits. He's tough as nails, and I think for certain defenses across the NFL and certain teams, you want a player like that who is tough and rugged. For him, things have unraveled because of decreasing playing time, because he's on a defensive line that is 2 to 3 deep at every single position. Injuries have also cost him a little bit, but he's also been prone to just being overly aggressive, and he's often penalized for these really dumbass penalties, late hits, unsportsmanlike conducts, because he kind of just plays at this certain motor where he's uber aggressive and uber tough, and he tries to really make his impact be felt. And he's kind of an old school defensive end where he's not like that twitchy type of edge rusher who has like a pass rush arsenal like a Hassan Reddick. He's not that player who's physically gifted like a Nick Bosa. He's just a bull rush, tough type of player. But I think San Francisco is set there with Chase Young and Randy Gregory. I thought Randy Gregory, limited snaps last night, really popped. I think San Francisco has seen something in him. That's why they were starting to give him more snaps than Drake Jackson before Drake Jackson went on IR. I thought that Chase Young had another impactful game last night. I loved what Steve Wilks was doing a couple of snaps where he had Nick Bosa and Chase Young lined up at defensive tackle, and they were kind of getting to the quarterback on some twists and stunts. So I think San Francisco, no need to really bring in Derek Barnett. He is 28 years old. I think he's going to be able to help a team out there that is looking for a defensive end. Quarterback hits and quarterback pressures, he's able to do it. Sack numbers have never really been there, but I think he's a solid rotational defensive end who just was a part of a numbers game, and that's why he wasn't playing that much. Also, I think the Eagles want to give more snaps to Nolan Smith.